All right, so I think with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Yep, so we are on to the prophet Obadiah. So as I say here in the heading here, it's a short but difficult book. This comes from what Jerome says about it. He says it is as difficult as it is brief. As you will notice, and as I mentioned last week, Obadiah is only one chapter long. But there's a lot that's jam-packed into one chapter here. It's a pretty unique look as well. We'll get into that as we get moving along. First thing, of course, that we like to start out with is background, if any, that is there for Obadiah. And really, there's not any background information we know about Obadiah. Now, there's some prophets that have listed such and such the son of whoever. This does not even pertain to Obadiah. Yeah, so we have no clue about what Obadiah did, unlike with Amos, who we got some background information about his occupation before he was called to be a prophet. Obadiah, we just don't know anything about. Yep. And right along with that, not knowing any background on Obadiah, we also do not know, or it's very hard, as I say here today, rather, that of when we can pinpoint when Obadiah was written, when he was a prophet. There are some that say that he could have been approximately 845 BC, and that could be, and that is based on the event that Obadiah mentions in his book about how Jerusalem was ransacked and looted. This is, of course, much before the destruction of the temple and the exile by the Babylonians, excuse me, in 586 BC. But this is one area that we can pinpoint him at. But most scholars say that Obadiah should be dated in the 6th century BC. That's according to one of the books that I have. Because of Obadiah denouncing certain countries' assistance, we'll discuss that in the next question here, in the destruction of Jerusalem. But note that Obadiah does not mention the temple in Jerusalem being ransacked and destroyed. So while we could pinpoint him to very close to the Babylonian exile, I would probably agree with most of the scholars saying that's probably not right there with the exile, because there's nothing listed about that exile happening. Otherwise, Obadiah would certainly mention that.
Okay.
And so the prophets, really, I should have just said prophet, that he could have been contemporary with is Jeremiah, for this particular reason. Well, and the other prophet, if we list him earlier, would be Elisha. But especially he would be contemporary of Jeremiah if we list him in between 605 to 587 BC. Like I said, right in that ballpark right before the Babylonian exile happened.
Okay.
And so I said that it's unique of what Obadiah talks about in this book, because for the last, pretty much all the minor prophets we've discussed so far, all of their messages have been against Israel and their unfaithfulness to God and how they will face judgment and destruction. However, Obadiah, does not pertain. This is not the case. Obadiah's message of judgment is not directed towards God's people, but toward their enemy. The enemy that this prophet is speaking to is that of Edom. E-D-O-M, Edom.
Mhm.
And Edom is more south of Jerusalem, if I have my map correctly. Of course, I did not bring, it is not in an easily accessible place right now for my map, but it is kind of more southern area, kind of south of Jerusalem. And there is a long history between Edom and Israel, and it's not good. So Edom is actually the land of Esau's descendants. Of course, Esau, we remember him as being the twin brother of Jacob. Now it goes all the way back to Jacob and Esau. Of course, we are familiar with what happens between those two. How even in the womb, they
Struggled.
right.
Fought.
Yes. Yeah, they struggled and they fought against each other in the womb. Yeah, so Edom is another name for Esau, just like Israel is the other name for Jacob. And Edom means red. This has a lot to do with the red hair on Esau, plus the stew that he orders Jacob to make for him, which allows Esau to give away his birthright. Yeah, and so like I said, Edom is directly south of the Dead Sea. So I was correct there. I just had to flip over another page of my notes to remember that. But yeah, so, and like I said, there's just been a lot of bad history between the two countries. They have had quite a few fights and struggles over the years. In fact, even when Moses was leading the people back home from Egypt, the people of Edom did not want them to go through. There's quite a few other listings as well, but yeah, like I said, and Edom is in the way that they are structured. They have, and we'll talk about this as we get into the text as well, but Edom is very prideful of how they are built because they're very much almost hidden with walls and I almost say caves, that's not the right word I'm looking for, but big mountainous walls that they've got pretty much is able to protect them pretty well from their enemies. And that's where they get kind of prideful. They're high up and they're hidden and all that. And that's gonna be what, yeah, that's gonna ultimately be their downfall. I kind of jumped the gun and answered this question right there. Just their pride and their self-confidence, where they're located, but also their pride and self-confidence of thinking they could get along without God. That is ultimately what's going to be Edom's downfall. And like I said, Obadiah is the one who speaks of their desolation, if you want to use that word, but their judgment would be more appropriate. Excuse me. So then, looking at the text itself, I figure it's a chapter long, 21 verses. We could probably just look straight into the text because why not? So right off the bat in verse 1, the first part of verse 1, it just lists the vision of Obadiah. And this proves that this is not Obadiah's own thoughts or insights, but it comes directly from Yahweh. So this is not something that Obadiah himself is giving wind to. This comes directly from Yahweh, from God.
Oh, I see.
So I know I just threw a bunch of information at you. Any questions or comments thus far before we dive into the text?
Mhm.
All right. Yeah, so in the in my Bible, it lists it under the heading of Edom will be humbled. That part of verse 1 of Obadiah, that's where we're going to continue.
Mhm.
Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty, dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. So that's what I was talking about earlier, how they are in the clefts of the rock, and they thought that being in those clefts, they were able to be completely protected and not have anything happen to them. That kind of false sense of security that they've got going on.
Mhm.
Right, so then continuing on with verse 5. If thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, how you have been destroyed. Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasures sought out. That's another thing that they were pretty boastful and prideful of, is the amount of wealth that they had. They thought that they were top dog out there because of their wealth. And Yahweh is telling them that, hey, not only are you going to be cut down by your false sense of security that you got, you're also going to be cut down with the wealth that you've got. And this is going to be cut down as well. Verse 7. All your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. Verse 10. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. This is what I was talking about earlier with an event that is not quite the exile of the people of Judah into Babylon, but pretty close. There are times that Babylon and neighboring countries came in and ransacked Jerusalem and wreaked havoc in Jerusalem. This is what Obadiah is talking about here. And the fact that Edom, rather than trying to help or anything, they participating in the pillaging and looting. And so that's what's being brought to light here. Verse 12. But do not gloat over the day of your brother, in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroad to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. So again, he is warning people,
Pointing to him.
yeah, that that's not a good thing that they're following the Babylonians in and helping them to loot the city of Jerusalem. And then, so the last section of Obadiah brings us to the last question here. And so Obadiah is the first prophet to use a certain phrase. Then the phrase that this is the day of the Lord. That is something that quite a few prophets use in their prophecies. But it's not quite clear what he means by the day of the Lord. Could this be the establishment of the church? Could this be the defeat of Babylon? The plague of locusts? What we talked about in Joel? We're not sure. But of course, all of these days lead up to, of course, the ultimate day of the Lord, which of course is the last day when Christ comes again. So starting off with verse 15. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deed shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them. There shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. I love that ending phrase right there at verse 18. The Lord has spoken. You know things are meaning business right there when you hear that.
Yep.
And basically, again, this points to what we talked about all the way in verse 1, how this is not something Obadiah is saying willy-nilly here. This is coming directly from Yahweh. So Edom should pay attention. All right, finishing out the book here at verse 19. Those of the Negeb shall possess Mount Esau, and those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The exiles of this host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. The exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad shall possess the cities of the Negeb. Savior shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. Yeah. So just kind of that flip-flop there of what Obadiah is listing there. This is saying how all these territories that the people of Israel had lost, they'll get restored. But they're going to possess territory again after being in exile and coming back. So I realized that was rather short, but so was the book of Obadiah itself. But are there any questions about Obadiah at all? All right.
Well, just that it's unusually short and we don't know anything about him.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
unusual.
Yes, very much so. I would agree with you. Yeah, between Obadiah and Joel, those two I think are the prophets that we just do not know anything about. One of those mysteries that you want to figure it out, but of course.
Was he Was he the only prophet to speak to Edom? Or is any other prophets tell him?
I believe so. I would have to go back and look at that again. But
Yeah.
I believe he was the only one speaking to Edom. Like I said, I'll have to go back and double check that though.
Yeah,
Of course, we know Jonah, who is coming up next, spoke to Nineveh, which is a city. I'd have to look back again and see what region Nineveh is in.
okay.
But yeah, so like I said, I'll double check that again. But
Just curious.
yeah, absolutely. Because you really don't hear a lot about Edom feature very often. Like I said, most of the time when prophets are speaking judgment, or at least the prophets of God are speaking judgment, it's on the people of God because they have not been faithful to the Lord, like Hosea, Joel, and Amos have discussed. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
I was just looking at the maps at the front of the book to see if there's any reference on Edom or,
Right, is that in the, what book is that? Is that Lutheran Study Bible or?
yeah, the Lutheran Study Bible.
Gotcha, okay. Pretty sure it doesn't go all the way down that far. Like I said, the map that I was looking at unfortunately is not. Okay, well, Lutheran Study Bible, I'm looking at it as well. Looks like it does go. Yeah, so this is the second map that I'm looking at here.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah.
And then the Geb.
But yeah, the Negeb that is mentioned, and then Edom is right down there on the
The
bottom.
bottom, yeah. And who does Joel talk to then? Or Jonah? No,
Jonah? Yeah, Jonah, remember, is sent to the people of Nineveh.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just trying to get a reference of where they're at.
Right, yeah.
Okay. We'll find some more maps.
Yep. So, yeah, so like I said, Jonah's going to be the next one that we feature. One of those classic ones that usually ends up in, if not every, most children's Bibles and Sunday school material. So, I think kids get a kick out of the fact that a guy was eaten by a big fish, you know?
Yeah.